Okay, I'm here in time. Something went wrong outside, and we hopefully won't have a problem with that, but it's time to continue with Day 10 of Month of Monsters. Hello, this is Soundout here, and welcome back to Month of Monsters. Today on Day 10, we're starting our feature on werewolves. Werewolves are one of the most prominent mythological creatures in all of culture. Globally, across the planet, almost every culture has a version of a werewolf that's been told in folklore and stories. Now, of course, most of what we'll be focusing on this week are going to be kind of your traditional werewolves that appeared in movies or TV shows, because that's typically what gets toys. And since this is sort of a toy-focused series, that's mostly what we're going to be covering. However, there will be some surprises that we're going to find, just sort of cropping up here and there throughout the week. In fact, today's subject is going to be kind of a 50-50, what was Lon Chaney Jr. doing? First of all, 1941's The Wolfman, one of the more prominent werewolf movies, probably the first popular one, Universal's second, but more on that in a different video. We're specifically looking at the Super 7 reaction figure. This was sort of designed to be kind of an 80s throwback, minor articulation, softer details, but harder plastic to kind of match those old vintage style action figures. So let's see if this actually works as a werewolf figure on its own, and if it's mostly just supposed to mix in with Star Wars toys. I'm not really too sure, and I'm kind of wondering, it may kind of work out on its own thing. So let's take a look at that as our first subject of the day.
I think one of the best things about Super 7's reaction figures is the card art. There's a beautiful portrait of Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. It looks very vibrant and very fun, and you have the figure included there as well. It's probably the thing that attracts me most to reaction because the overall card experience is really spectacular. On the back of the packaging, you can see the other figures in the Universal Monsters way that this figure was included in, which includes the Mummy, the Metaluna Mutant, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Phantom of the Opera as the Mask of the Red Death, and the Mole People. Looking at the reaction Wolfman, you can see he's very, very basic. This is your basic action figure. 5 points of articulation, not a ton of detail, but, he looks pretty cool, actually. I think the head sculpt pretty much invokes the original Wolfman design quite well. You got the underbite of the lower teeth just sticking up there. You got kind of the eye shape and the overall head shape. It's pretty cool overall. I do also appreciate that they gave it the haunched look of those feet without it being unstable. This figure still stands pretty good on its own because they gave it enough of a flat surface, so that's always nice to see. They didn't give him flat feet, which would be wrong, but they didn't make them impossible to stand. Though you can see some of the paint is a little messy in some places, but that may be intentional. Looking at articulation, it's just the head swiveling left and right, the arms swivel 360, and the legs move forward and a little bit back. This does mean you can get him into very minor poses, such as Sasquatch walking through forest. Putting him next to a vintage Star Wars figure, you can start to see where the idea of this line comes in. With the vintage Bosk here, he's kind of another wolf guy in Star Wars, and that kind of works out better. I think if you're going for a reaction, if you're not collecting for the card art, you're probably collecting to see if it could meld in with some other figures or other reaction figures. So overall, this isn't a figure that's really that spectacular. I think he's serviceable for what he's trying to do. If you're into the reaction style, you're gonna like it. If you're not, it's not gonna hit you as well. And I think it's kind of fun to have this Wolfman figure. It was one I bought because it was the Wolfman. And it's kind of neat, but I'm gonna slip him back into the package and put him up on a wall because the card art's really what got me kind of into these figures in just a casual sense.
Now our main subject today is going to be kind of an interesting little figure. Mego sort of returned to prominence, and they brought back their toy line after being gone for roughly 40 years or so, something like that. No big deal. They brought back Mego, and they brought back those old 8-inch style action figures with the body suits and the action figure bodies. They were the world's first action figure, and they can take that claim to fame. Do these hold up to modern standards? Not as much, but it's kind of a nice retro throwback. Now, while they did do original Universal monsters in that lineup, the modern line couldn't get all the rights right away. For example, they couldn't license the Wolfman, which of course, any company that's making a werewolf that's sort of Universal inspired is going to want Lon Chaney Jr.'s the Wolfman. It's just, he's an iconic staple at this point. But, Mego had to do something different, and they licensed 1965's Face of the Screaming Werewolf. And if this is the first time you've heard of it, that doesn't mean you're out of the loop on monster movies. It means you haven't looked into the dark, dark, deep secrets of monster films that have consumed the minds of some of us for years, trying to wonder just how the heck did it end up working out that this was going to be something that we had to follow. But what is Face of the Screaming Werewolf, you might ask? It is in fact a combination of two films from Mexico, House of Terror and The Aztec Mummy. They're completely unrelated in their original Spanish versions, but they were combined and dubbed into English and released as Face of the Screaming Werewolf. Now, why did they do this? Well, Lon Chaney Jr.'s career didn't exactly go the way it should have. He never became a big star, and after Universal stopped making monster movies, he pretty much was still making monster movies. So he sort of reprised the werewolf type character, even though it's not Larry Talbot. It's a different werewolf. And that's ended up how he got into House of Terror. And so from there, you have a Lon Chaney werewolf appearance, and then the American company's like, well, we want that as our headliner, because there certainly isn't anything else that American audiences would recognize. So combining the Aztec Mummy with House of Terror resulted in a mummified werewolf. And then somehow, all these years later, Mego decided, yeah, that's our werewolf we're going to go with. Which, I mean, hey, it's a Lon Chaney Jr. werewolf. It's just not the one that everybody was looking for. And while Mego went back and actually did the Universal werewolf later as the Wolfman, this one's kind of like the standout in my collection because he's got kind of a lot of those ideas. In fact, it's kind of one of the early flannel shirt werewolves, which became sort of a trend later. Maybe I should be concerned about my little walk outside. Anyways, let's look at the Mego Face of the Screaming Werewolf action figure.
So we're going to be looking at the first release of the Screaming Werewolf in Mego's line, that being the red-shirted version. This was exclusive to Target when Target had the exclusive license to Mego, and for whatever reason, they decided the Buy Pride flag colors was the best packaging design they could go with, so I guess the Screaming Werewolf is a buy icon now. When Mego went wide and was available at all retailers, a second Face of the Screaming Werewolf figure was released. It's based on this one, but it has a blue shirt, and it's not as tattered, and it has a couple buttons and a little paint detail that's a little extra, but not like I really wanted to replace the first one I had. And then adding to that same mold and same clothing design idea was applied to the flocked werewolf figure, which was just werewolf. It wasn't specifically any movie, even though it's using basically the same mold. It now is fuzzy, which is different, but let's go back to that original red-shirted version. Looking at him, he's got a red plaid shirt, nice little flannel look, nice tattered pants, and overall, good werewolf, especially one that's of a classic variety. Looking at the feet, they are flat-footed, but honestly, I don't know if Face of the Screaming Werewolf was really worried about having the haunched feet that the Wolfman had, so I don't know, it looks good. And it's nice that it's not shoes put over the normal Mego feet, but in fact, new feet. The shirt itself is nicely tattered. It's got kind of a hand-tattered feel, doesn't feel so manufactured, which is pretty nice. And it's overall a nice fabric material. It adds a lot of depth. However, the normal werewolf hands is kind of a bummer because I would have liked something with claws just to kind of liven it up a bit. The head sculpt's interesting. It's got the underbite that you sort of expect from classic Wolfman, but of course it is based on Face of the Screaming Werewolf, so it's a little bit different. But if you're kind of looking for something that kind of fits into a classic werewolf vibe, and the general, sort of things are put through a Mego filter when made into Mego, it actually works pretty good as any kind of Wolfman you want. Now the shirt does open up, but it's a normal Mego torso underneath with no extra fur detail, so a little boring. Articulation-wise, as with Mego, he has a left and right swivel, shoulders that move forward, they kind of move out, they're on rubber bands, elbows that bend, he's got wrists that swivel in and out, he's got a ball jointed torso, hips that move out, forward, back, he does have a single knee joint, as well as an adjustable ankle joint. Ultimately, the Screaming Werewolf figure is interesting. I think the story behind it is actually more exciting than the figure itself. I do like having it, and like I said, I hadn't picked up any of the other Mego Wolfman figures after this because I like how unique this is. I don't think anybody else is tackling Face of the Screaming Werewolf. Like, if NECA were to announce an Ultimates version of Face of the Screaming Werewolf tomorrow, like they did with Creature of the Black Lagoon right after I said they should, that would be insane. But in terms of the actual figure, this is probably the one time we'll get this version of a werewolf released, and for that, it makes it a unique staple among werewolf action figures.
So when it comes down to it, it's kind of interesting to see not only a more basic retro throwback in a style that the figures were never previously available, and then a retro throwback that was in a style that the characters were previously available, but not the version you'd expect. So Reaction and Mego kind of go hand in hand. It's really for the retro throwback, not for upgrading anything, not for really trying to make your life better or to transform yourself into something different, but in terms of just like the Mego and Reaction feeling, like the feeling of those figures is kind of fun since they're modern versions of something old and something that, you know, is familiar, and I think that's kind of a fun element. Now, that's it for today on Month of Monsters. However, next time, we're going to be looking at a much more accurate, much more thought out Lon Chaney Wolfman figure that's really out to capture the likeness. So stay tuned for tomorrow, where I'm sure everything's gonna go great, and there's gonna be no more hiccups. Ah!